Curt Cignetti and Indiana's New Deal proves the Hoosiers won't just be a 2024 flash in the pan. USC loses one five-star quarterback and picks up another on a SoCal Sunday. And Wisconsin says so Longo to their offensive coordinator. Plenty to talk about in a post-Week 12 edition of Big Nation.
From Pasadena to Piscataway, College Park to the Coliseum, Seattle to State College, Columbus to Camp Randall, the Zoo to the Rock, and everywhere in between. This is where Big Ten fans gather to talk America's premier national conference with your host, Big Ten Ted. All Big Ten, all year long. This is Big Nation.
Certainly some storylines to talk about of what happened between the lines this weekend. How about Oregon squeaking by Wisconsin's best defensive showing of the season? How about Nebraska losing their fifth consecutive game? They are in danger of missing a bowl game yet again, and Iowa may be down to their third quarterback for the remainder of the season. If not, it's going to be Cade McNamara, who wasn't exactly lighting it up for the Hawkeyes. So there's plenty to talk about, but you go from between the lines to outside the lines, I think is where I get my three major storylines following this November weekend of college football within the Big Ten. And of course, I want to start with the 10-0 darling Curt Cignetti and Indiana. They have agreed on a new 8-year contract that pays Curt Cignetti about $8 million per year on average. You've also got a $1 million per year retention bonus. Where does that land Cignetti in the grand scheme of things? Well, it makes him the 5th highest paid coach in the Big Ten, and it makes him the 16th highest paid coach in all of college football. You take those ranks in terms of salary, I think those are the ranks where IU and Cignetti are going to expect Indiana to be on a yearly basis. I don't think that they're going to win 10 and 11 games every single year like they are this season. But I think now that this is an Indiana team, this is an Indiana program, this is an Indiana administration, everybody is aligned, folks. They talk about alignment, and it is so important, from administration to coach to collective. Everybody at the top, the coach leading the group on the field, and the financial part. If you can nail those three parts to an organization, you can win, and it doesn't matter who you are. Indiana has proved that. If you are a school out there that is historically not good, like Indiana was, this is a proof of concept that if you can nail those three parts of your organization, you can be a winner in a very short period of time. But this just makes the Big Ten that much more difficult, I think, going forward in the future. I think Indiana is going to be that team that can win 8 to 10 games every year, and certainly they can jump up to maybe that 11-win type of team like they are expected to be certainly this season. Indiana was one of those schools where you could look around and say, yeah, most teams can chalk that up as a W. Not anymore. Not anymore. If some teams in the Big Ten can raise their profile, it just strengthens the depth, certainly, of this conference. I think IU is here to stay because everybody is on the same page and the investment certainly is there. And that's a big deal of why Curt Cignetti came to Indiana in the first place. There was an investment that IU, their collective and their administration, were giving to Hoosier football. And Curt Cignetti said, yeah, that's great. And then check out Curt in some of these interviews, that after he came on campus and some time went by, that expectation was actually an above expectation mark as they raised the ceiling. Their NIL collective is one of the best right now in the Big Ten, and they are proving it this year, and they are going to continue to prove it, I think, certainly in the future. Now, the question is going to be, can they sustain success? They snuck up on everybody, and they played really good football. We'll see how this Cinderella story ends this season. But in order to maintain this success, they need to be able to recruit at a high level. Right now, I think they're sitting something like 13th in the Big Ten in recruiting. Now, they're in the mix for Julian Lewis. More on that in just a minute after he has now decommitted from USC. But they need to be able to recruit something like above the top half of the Big Ten, something like 7th, 8th, somewhere in there, and then to be able to add those transfers on top of it and then be able to develop some of those players into Big Ten all-conference players certainly in the future. But this is bad news for the rest of the Big Ten. If you're looking to rise up and you were banking on maybe Cignetti going somewhere else, which was never going to happen, this is going to be, and this is going to make the Big Ten just that much more difficult going forward. All right, I'm going to flip to Southern California, much in the same vein that Husan Longstreet did on Saturday. You know that your program, I should really say Lincoln Riley more than USC, but you know Lincoln Riley still got it when he can have 2 subpar seasons with the Trojans and still lose 1 5-star quarterback on one day, and then mere hours afterwards, you can pick up another 5-star quarterback. Now, there's been some drama with Julian Lewis, okay? He said he was locked into USC. He said he was comfortable with USC, but he was taking other visits to other programs to be able to complete his recruiting process, and he said, I just want to go through the process. Well, it turns out it was more than just the process when he decommitted. Now, USC kind of figured that this was happening. So they went out and they kind of had all of their bases covered with a local kid from Corona Centennial High School, Husan Longstreet. Man, he is the real deal. I've watched both of these kids now on tape, and I think actually USC is making an upgrade with Longstreet over Julian Lewis. I like Lewis. I think right now, going to the 2025 season, he's probably a little bit more polished, but I think the ceiling is higher for Longstreet right now than it is for Julian Lewis. I like Longstreet's athleticism and his arm strength more than Lewis right now. Like some of those throws that I watch on tape, he is throwing that ball 30 yards on a frozen rope down the field, where Julian Lewis is maybe putting a little bit more air under the ball on some of those deep throws. But I think the package is there for Husan Longstreet to be the next great quarterback for Lincoln Riley. And what did we find out this year? Well, we found out multiple things, but I think we found out USC really needs that elite quarterback for this offense to really work. Miller Moss wasn't that. I'm not sure if Jade Maeva certainly is going to be that either. So we could talk about Julian Lewis and Husan Longstreet until we're cardinal and gold in the face, and you can take my word for it. You can also take On3 and 247 and their industry standards for it, because they rank Husan Longstreet ahead of Julian Lewis right now. So we could talk about all of those comparisons right now forever and ever and ever, but neither of these guys are going to reach their full potential if USC doesn't address the real problem right now, and that has happened for the last 2 years and why they've achieved subpar seasons, and it's the offensive line. Caleb Williams was running around a lot last season. Miller Moss, although the sack numbers for USC's offensive line are pretty decent, he's taken a lot of hits, and the pass protection certainly hasn't been there. This offseason, via recruiting and transfer portal, and as you go into next season, even to 2026, you have to address this offensive line. That has to be the number one priority. Okay, you got your quarterback for the future. You've got really good weapons right now that are going to be coming back, in theory, for USC if they don't hit the transfer portal. Address the offensive line, because if you can have the diamond asset, you can have the diamond ring, but if you don't have the insurance, it's going to get damaged. USC, go out and get some insurance. It was long anticipated that Julian Lewis was going to flip, and it was long anticipated that Phil Longo would not make it to 2025, and that's exactly what happened. Luke Fickell announced that Phil Longo will no longer serve as the offensive coordinator for the Wisconsin Badgers. Now, I'm going to get to Phil and the overarching future maybe on offense for Wisconsin, but I want to make sure I hit a couple of things home first of all. Now, in the overarching sense of the program for Wisconsin, it should be no surprise to anybody kind of what happened on Saturday as to their defense playing good football. Luke Fickell and Mike Tressel have a great track record of defense, so it's no surprise that that defense is the stronger unit. It's very clear that that unit is certainly headed in the right direction. They need to figure out things on the offensive side of the football, certainly. And I'll also say this about Phil and the failures at Wisconsin. It's the injuries at the quarterback position. It certainly didn't help him out. Like, you first look at Tanner Mordecai last season, who got hurt during the middle of the year. Now, even before injury, I think it was fairly certain that Tanner Mordecai was not the guy that maybe I and some other people expected him to be for the Wisconsin Badgers. And that goes back to Phil, because we're going to take a look at a lot of these where Phil Longo, the hire himself as the offensive coordinator, was a swing and a miss. And some of the personnel that Phil brought in was also a swing and a miss. Tanner Mordecai was one of those guys when he was healthy, and then it certainly didn't help him out when he was injured. Who came in when Tanner Mordecai was injured? Braden Locke. Who came in when Tyler Van Dyke was injured after the Alabama game? Braden Locke. You can talk about these injuries, but I still think it comes down to Phil Longo swinging and missing on guys like a Tanner Mordecai at quarterback, a Braden Locke coming in at quarterback, and they brought Landon Locke as the commit that's scheduled to come to Wisconsin. Certainly not sure if that schedule is going to come to fruition here in the coming years at the University of Wisconsin. But here's what I will say about these last 23 games. And for those of you watching on YouTube, you can see it. For those of you watching on podcast, I'll say it. I think it's the stat, because you can throw out so many different stats as to why this Wisconsin offense failed. But I think one that really is the microcosm of all this, Wisconsin ranked 101st nationally in scoring in Longo's 23 games as the offensive coordinator. That is just unacceptable when Phil Longo brought in the acclaim that he did coming over from North Carolina, where he had seasons with 2 1,000-yard rushers, where he had guys like a Sam Howell and a Drake May certainly within that offense as well. Yeah, safe to say it was a failure. The big problem for Phil Longo and these Wisconsin offenses over the past 2 seasons was identity. Now, it's harder to establish an identity when you have those quarterback injuries. I will certainly say that. But we knew what the Wisconsin identity was for 2+ decades. It was run the football. It was great offensive lines. It was physicality. And wow, believe it or not, shocker, Wisconsin was at their best during these last 23 games when they were running the football. Look at that game on Saturday. I think it was early second half. Wisconsin's up 10-6, and they are just pounding the ball down Oregon's throat. Now, it ended up in a field goal and not a touchdown. Maybe that's a microcosm of the Phil Longo era, certainly. But Wisconsin still continues to prove that they need to run the football. They need to be a physical football team. So now when you transition to the Phil Longo era to see who's next, please, we're flipping into fan mode. I'm flipping into fan mode. Luke Fickell, Chris McIntosh, I pray at the altar of Barry Alvarez, find yourself an offensive coordinator that invests into running the football. You have a really good young running back in Darian Dupree. You've got a guy in Dylan Jones who was actually rated higher coming out of high school than Darian Dupree. You've got good backs within your system. You are Wisconsin. It has proven to work. When Wisconsin has been able to move the ball effectively this season and last season, it's been due to their ability to run the football. Now, we can't go all the way back to Paul Crisp, where the passing game is inept and not very explosive, right? You still need to be able to have that balance. So you need to be able to find someone that really believes in a run-first offense, but that can also bring in some fairly dynamic passing concepts to Madison, Wisconsin as well. Folks, this hire is huge for Luke Fickell. If he doesn't nail it, he's going to be good as gone. He's got to get this right. He swung and he missed on Phil Longo. The future of Wisconsin football really depends on this hire. I kind of like what he's doing, getting ahead of the game right now and kind of getting his foot out there for other people who may be interested in moving, that Wisconsin is going to be a great opportunity for them going forward. Man, lots to talk about. Lots to talk about within the conference. I'm back from the Northwoods of Minnesota. The last 2 weeks have been a little bit on hiatus on the weekend, but now I am full go all the way to the national championship on January 20th. And I am excited. It is going to be a fantastic finish to this Big Ten college football season. I'm Big Ten Ted. We'll see you in the next one.
Thank you for watching and listening to Big Nation. Make sure to subscribe and follow Big Ten Ted on X, YouTube, and podcast platforms to stay in the know on all things Big Ten football.